Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. It's a pleasure to be back at Google. My name is Ronnie Zeiger. I was here for about 6 years until just a couple weeks ago. And it's especially sweet to get to present, to introduce a friend, Eric Topol, who is actually a little bit of a hero to me. I won't get too weepy, don't worry. But he's a professor of translational genomics at the Scripps Institute, south of here, also director of that institute. He's also the co-founder of the West Wireless Institute down in San Diego. He's also a cardiologist, and if you're starting to get a sense that this guy is sort of a rocket scientist and a brain surgeon, he's almost all of those things. He's been central in developing a lot of medications, and other technologies that many of us in the field of medicine take for granted and use every day. And perhaps most important, if someone asks for a doctor on an airplane, Eric will not only volunteer, but he'll bring his iPhone, put it on their chest, and get a cardiogram. So this is a guy that you really want to travel with. Let's go on a journey with him now.
Great. Thanks, man. Thanks a lot. Okay. It's great to be here with you. Great to be at Google. I've never been here before. And well, it should be fun. I know maybe it's because so many people are young here, they're not so into their health or the health world, but those of you who are here, I hope will have an interesting informative experience. I'll certainly enjoy it. So first I put this quote up because I thought that would set the tone for what we're going to talk about during this hour. And this is a Voltaire 250 years ago, and I'm afraid it's not much different today. The whole notion that doctors are doing things with good intentions, but they don't have the information. And that's going to change very quickly. So there's a very noted, very famous Austrian economist whose name was Joseph Schumpeter, and he was responsible for the idea that great innovation in an economy with entrepreneurship could change an economy. And that graph of old economy going to a new economy is shown here. And this term of creative destruction he's really credited for having pushed forward. And that's what I think applies to our opportunities in medicine and in healthcare. And that's really an exciting thing that we can do. So since Schumpeter is one of my heroes, I was really surprised when I was reading The Economist, my favorite weekly read. I'm reading the Schumpeter column. This is just a week ago. And I'm looking at this column and saying, oh, now for some good news. I had no idea what it was going to be about. And then I found out it was about a book review of this book. And it was very positive about a godsend for those who suffer Armageddon fatigue. So hopefully you'll find this to be a very upbeat experience, as the reviewer did there. And of course, The Economist is interesting because they're unsigned. So I don't even know who Schumpeter is on The Economist. But what we're going to talk about is how digitizing human beings, which is what generates this remarkable information, is going to reboot the future of medicine. And before I get into that topic, because that's really how we can do this, I wanted to get a sense of how many of you are on Twitter here? Everybody? Not everybody, but a majority. See, most times when I talk, there are people who are really worried about their health, and they happen to be at least 50, 60, 70, and they don't even know Twitter exists for the most part. So there's a different group. It's fun to talk to folks who are more plugged in. I get most of my valuable information from Twitter. I'll show you a couple of slides that I made this morning through Twitter. So that's kind of, to me, a great reservoir. If everybody shares their information that they get to with everyone else interested in a particular space, it's great. So I want to convince you of three things. The first one hopefully will be the easiest because we're here at a major force that's done this. Our world has been Schumpetered. The second is that medicine's going to go there, and it's just starting now. And the third is that we need consumers to drive this whole thing forward, because otherwise, at least some of us will not be around to see it. And I certainly want to see this thing take hold and improve the whole way we render prevention and healthcare in the future. So I want to start off on the digital side of this, and that's your kind of comfort zone, I know, on the 0-1. And just to point out that I think you're well aware that in the last decade, there was just a remarkable jump forward, the likes of which we've never seen. And of course, in context, for example, there are now more cell phones on the planet than there are toilets or toothbrushes. That's a pretty big thing that who would ever, when Marty Cooper invented the cell phone in 1973, who would ever thought that would actually happen, and so quickly, particularly in the last decade. And then these devices have been remarkably transformative. And the span of time from the iPod in 01 all the way through the BlackBerry, then was renamed Crackberry, now more recently Slackberry. Then there's iPhones, prototype phone, and of course, I guess here I should have put a Droid phone up there, but sorry about that. Then there's the e-books and the tablets. And this is like 9 years. And these devices, and I'm looking around, I'm thinking, well, how come you're not looking at your device right now? Because you're basically surgically attached to them. And you're giving me the great privilege of a few minutes of attention before you delve right into your mobile devices. So they've been very remarkably transformative. And in fact, everything that we do, well beyond how we communicate, how we think and behave, has been very much influenced by these wireless devices. In fact, when you think about that, if life could have changed so quickly in this span of 9 years, how come it couldn't do that in the medical sphere? And that really got me thinking. So in fact, this current issue of The Economist is this article, this Schumpeter column, Slaves to the Smartphone. I don't know if you think you're a slave. I certainly feel I'm an e-slave to the smartphone or tablet because there's so much information coming in, and you certainly want to try to communicate with your network. So what's going on now is that it isn't even just one screen that we are attached to. It's now become multiple screens. And now it's a tablet, it's a PC, computer, it's a smartphone. And now we have a new species of man, Homo distractus, as demonstrated here. And Homo distractus has a new add-on feature because later this year I understand there's going to be these Google glasses. And I haven't seen exactly what they are. This is one speculative design of them. But if you really have augmented reality as well as being able to potentially read things from the web or your email through your glasses, that's going to be yet another screen to add to Homo distractus. It starts at a very young age, this whole process. So you're not so far removed from that. And I thought that was pretty young when I looked at that. And then I didn't realize that it's actually starting at an even younger age, as shown here. And so this is, I think, a phenomena that's very, very interesting. Now, I know that so many of you are digital natives here, for the vast majority. So you can appreciate that for those of us who've had to learn this whole world in the midstream of our lives, it's been much more challenging. So there's some questions I'm going to ask you, and they're obvious, but I'll ask them anyway. But I wanted to give you the sense of time compression. So what was 0 in 2004, and then was 800 million in 2010? Was, I know you know the answer to this.
Competitors' number of users.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, I like that answer. So that, of course, represents a competitor, but you're well aware that that's going to be about 1 billion, unless there's an awful lot of defriending that occurs between now and then to go to Google Plus or I don't know what, or just to abandon social networking, which I think is most unlikely. And of course, the valuation of this company is predicated on the like button, and this is the beginning of a social network dedicated company of digitizing people. You've been doing that for a long time at Google, much longer. What year was Google founded? 98? Anybody know here? 98, yeah. So you've been in this world of digitizing people in some respect for a long time. And of course, what the worst thing could happen is you wake up and you don't have any friends. That'd probably be good if you're trying to promote your social network. But these companies, your company, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, have done an extraordinary job of digitizing people at a very superficial level. not medical, of course. Well, we'll get into some exceptions to that. But what it shows is that you can collect some data, and this, of course, can be very important for an individual's likes and affinities, and important for consumer engagement and purchasing and that sort of thing. But wait till this goes medical, and that's where this can go over time. So I thought you might have seen this article, perhaps, in the Atlantic just a couple of weeks ago about I'm being followed, how Google and 104 other companies are tracking me on the web. Have you read that article? Yeah? No? You don't? Anyway, it's a very interesting article. It talks about how no matter what, you're going to get digitized, essentially, not using those terms. And then this other feature article in the New York Times Magazine was about the idea that the retail, it's not just Google and 104 other companies that are set up to do this, but in fact, there's Target and all the retail companies that are doing this. And so they know, for example, a woman's pregnant before her family even knows that she's pregnant because of the data that can be acquired. So I thought you might enjoy this if you hadn't already seen it. This is how to protect yourself from getting digitized by Google. Have you all seen this already? I saw this and I broke out in hysterical laughter because I said, oh my gosh, play the music loud so they can't hear what you're typing. Unplug computer from power source. Medical gloves to obscure fingerprints and finger stains on keys. You know, but obviously this isn't just applying to Google. This is applying to the fact that you may be getting digitized to some extent and you don't really have a way to, all these things are not going to work, of course. So that's the way life is today. Then there's this social network. This is, of course, zero in 2006, zero, now 2 years later after the beginning of Facebook, and now well over 300 million per day. And you know what that is. That's the number of, yeah, somebody said it. Yeah, tweets. So that is, of course, part, now the big three, perhaps in the US, but there's all these other social networks around the world. And of course, many of them are country, continent specific. You know, there's Brazil with Orkut, and there's QQ in China, and that sort of thing. Well, this together has created a force that no one could have predicted. And, you know, I think when Eric Schmidt said, we missed the friend thing, we all missed the friend thing. It wasn't just at Google. But now this friend thing of sharing pictures and emotions and thoughts and videos has had, of course, monstrous, phenomenal impact. And that's why revolutions have occurred, the Arab Spring, the Occupy Wall Street movement, and so many other things of power to the people by crowd sharing, crowd activating, crowd sourcing. Really a remarkable time in our history, in our civilization, because of this electronic bounding of people. So this is an example of a rudimentary social network that has had a medical impact. And this is, as far as we know, the first person on Facebook who's putatively, his life was saved, a young boy who was very sick, and he couldn't get a diagnosis, went to 2 pediatricians, and then his mother posted his picture on Facebook, and one of her Facebook friends made the diagnosis of Kawasaki's disease. And that's what led to the right treatment, and of course he's done very well. And now they are an explosion of these online health communities. And this is a good thing, but it's also been an awakening because now so many people with a chronic condition, whether it be diabetes or a type of cancer or things like multiple sclerosis, they go on these Patients Like Me and other communities, Cure Together. They find people with the same condition, and now these virtual peers become the people who they trust the most. They've never met them, but they trust them much more than their doctors, which is really, in many ways, a seismic shakeup of the relationship between doctors and patients. And so much so that this, to me, is shocking. This is nearly 4,000 doctors who were polled as to, do you know that there's these things like Patients Like Me? And only 11%, and this is recent, just a few months ago, only 11% even knew they existed. But if they talked to their patients, they would find that that's who their patients are spending their time with to get guidance. So that shows you the chasm that exists today between the medical profession and what the needs are and the access, the capabilities of empowered consumers who want to get this information. Now, I know you're going to get this one right, right? This is the one group that could get this one right. What does this represent? Nobody knows? Really? Okay, it's at the San Diego Zoo. Does that help you? No. Okay, I'm really surprised. This is historically very significant. This is the first YouTube ever video. Okay, when was that? April 2005. Well over 6 million hits. Now, why is this important? It's a stupid video. It just says, here I am at the San Diego Zoo, right? But the point is that this is just not even 7 years ago. And look at the data for YouTube, okay? This is an amazing thing. 800 million unique users per month. 3 billion views per day. 3 trillion hours of video per month. I mean, this is staggering. 60 hours of video are uploaded every minute. What are we doing sitting here? We should be watching a video or uploading or both. So this is an amazing amount of data in this video and graphic world that we live in. And so much so that we are generating data at a clip which no one could ever have forecasted. That is, from the beginning of civilization to 2003, there were only 1 billion gigabytes, which is kind of amazing because we walk around with lots of gigabytes in our pocket. And now we are generating 1 trillion gigabytes, a zettabyte, at least one every year. That plot, of course, is markedly increasing, and that's why it looks like we'll have well over 35 zettabytes by the end of just this decade. So that creates a big problem with data, especially when you want to extract out of that data the useful information that has heretofore often been only scratching the surface. And this big data term is terribly underplaying the ginormity of this data issue. But just like Moneyball, we can have this in medicine. We can learn a lot more about a particular pitcher or batter by doing a lot more work on that data. And we'd like to learn a lot more about each individual, prevent them from becoming a patient by doing this sort of thing. How are we going to do that in this world of just ginormous data flooding? Well, the supercomputer of Watson has been, and other supercomputers, has been suggested to be able to save a life. And of course, the reason for that is that a supercomputer, Watson, can process 2 million pages of content in 3 seconds. Now, there are a lot of really good doctors out there, but I don't think that they can get to 2 million pages of content in 3 seconds. And if you have a really complex patient that you don't know what's going on, like what happened with WellPoint, one of the largest insurers, they decided to contract Watson because then they could get all the information about an individual patient to help sort out in a complex diagnosis. That's a good thing. Why don't all doctors and all patients have access to a supercomputer in times of need? That's where things will go eventually. Then there's the cloud, of course, the cloud story, which is amazing. It's important that this, of course, emerged, these massive server farms, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to store or even handle, manipulate some of this data. So what's great about the cloud is now it's even making its way to places like United Health. And recently they have, just last month, declared they're going to make their cloud data, which is the largest private insurer of health in the United States, available to all their doctors and soon to all the patients who are covered by United Health. That's a step in the right direction. But this cloud thing is so overcooked that I thought these cartoons might help put it in perspective. This one is the check is in the cloud. And the other one, it was much nicer before people started storing all their personal information in the cloud. Okay, so now we have this kind of rapid fire. It started in the 70s. It wasn't so rapid then. The cell phone I mentioned, the personal computer, the internet. And then things really started taking off, and you see this clustering in a short period of time of wireless digital devices, sequencing, social networks, cloud and supercomputing, all setting up the potential for this era of a great inflection in medicine. And that's what I'm going to be, of course, trying to convince you that we're on the cusp of that right now, of really actualizing that opportunity. So bookstores and books is a really interesting story there. How many of you only read books as an e-book? No. 1, 2. I guess 3. All right. And how many will read only hard copy books? Okay. 4. Okay, so should I assume that the rest don't read any books or read a combination of the two? Help me on that. Combination. Okay, okay. Anyway, that's okay. If you don't read any books, you got a lot of other things to do. I understand. So the reason I show this, of course, is that there's a prediction that hard copy books are going to be no longer with us. And of course, we've seen the likes of things like Borders bookstore, chain bookstores closing. Well, today is a big day. Today is a day on the front page of the New York Times, the Encyclopedia Britannica, after 244 years. That's the same time when Voltaire was saying that we didn't know anything about medicine. 244 years later, the Encyclopedia Britannica is mea culpa. We're not going to print this thing anymore, ever again. That's pretty striking. That's today. And to me, the final thing about this book, I'm using the book thing as to emblematic of the world changing. I could go into all sorts of other things, but this is the one I think that really hits home for me. I did some of my training, my cardiology training at Johns Hopkins. And Johns Hopkins has this library that I lived at a lot called the Welsh Medical Library. And this library was closed on January 1st, the second largest medical library in this country, no longer functional. Does that tell you a story about where we are in a changing world and a world that's been Schumpetered? So I hope I've convinced you of that fact in this kind of opening segment. And if I haven't, then this probably would be a good time to move on, because this is the best I can do in this time span. Okay, now we're going to talk about medicine and how it will inevitably be Schumpetered, because up until now, the digital macrocosm, ginormous infrastructure that's been developed, which I've very briefly reviewed with you that you're very much in touch with. Then there's this medical microcosm, cocoon, that's done everything possible to not let there be any convergence or any penetration of the digital world. The only foray into that has been this very weak lack of real use of electronic health records, and of course accounting for the difficulties that you experience with Google Health records and that sort of thing, because it's so resistant to the digital world. Well, that's going to change, and this is all going to come together. There will be a convergence. It's just a matter of when, and when that happens, there's a big, big thing which we never had before, and that's the ability to digitize man, digitize human beings. Not to find out, what they purchase now or what they will purchase, but rather what makes them tick. And that's really the exciting thing. That takes us away from where we are in medicine today, which is at the population level. Everything we do is population-based. So for example, when we say all women after age 40 should have a mammogram every year, that's treating all people the same. When in fact, many women, a significant proportion, have zero risk of ever developing breast cancer. Another example, we give a medicine for a particular condition, let's say diabetes. We use metformin. There's 400 million diabetics on the planet. They get the same drug, the same dose, even though 25% of them are unable to respond to that drug. But that's how medicine is practiced today. We do large clinical trials of thousands of patients. We find a few per 100 benefit, and then everyone gets the drug. That's wrong, totally dead wrong. And now, for the first time, we have the tools to understand things at the individual level. And that's extraordinary. And that's what we're going to get into. So Thomas Getz, the editor of Wired magazine, wrote this really brilliant feature article in that magazine about the feedback loop. And the whole point here is it's a feedback loop of data, whether it's genomic data or physiologic metric data. I'll show you a couple of examples. And that changes things. That's like a real reset of how we understand any given individual. So this started in the healthcare world, fitness world, I should say, whereby Nike shoes, I don't know how many of you have these Nike Plus shoes that have sensors in the sole of their foot, and they can track the distance and the velocity and other metrics of exercise. And then these wireless accelerometers. Have any of you tried things like the Fitbit, Body Media? You have. Okay, great. So those are great. I recommend them to my patients because they encourage you to be more active. And I think that that's a great thing. They're relatively inexpensive. The most recent one was just announced a little over a week ago, the Nike Fuel Band. And so they encourage people to be more active. That's good. Then there's the use of sensors for detecting your quality of sleep, because we live in this wired world of wireless devices, and we don't get enough sleep. In fact, the overall sleep of the population has been declining in a very worrisome pattern. So there's a device that I've used. There are many devices that monitor sleep. This is the only one that actually monitors brain waves. And this is a Zeo device. Have any of you used it here? So we got the same 3 people that have used all these sensors. Okay, that's all right. Someday your experience will wear off on the others here. Anyway, this is a great home electroencephalogram. Who would ever thought you could have your brain waves at home for $99 going directly to your phone? Pretty neat. And also a clock version, which is what they came out with originally, and shows right on the clock every minute of sleep. This is a night of my sleep. You see the orange bars are the awake time. The gray bars are light sleep, which isn't worth much. The light green bars are the dream, rapid eye movement sleep, which is a good thing. And then the best of all is this deep restorative sleep, the dark green. So I'm using this, and I'm trying to get to be a better sleeper. And very shortly after I started using this, my wife, who's a night owl, comes in the room and she looks at the clock and she says, "Eric, I know you're awake and I want to talk." Okay. And that's good that people at this age can appreciate that, because that's, of course, one of those kinds of things that you would particularly appreciate getting older. Anyway, what's interesting is you also know, of course, when their brain is awake. And in fact, this was discovered by 3 Brown University college students. They didn't want to do this. What they wanted to do was not to have to be woken up out of a deep sleep. So they invented this sensor just so they wouldn't have to wake up at it. They wanted to only be woken up when they were in a light sleep. And that's what led to this interesting device. Well, of course, when the Wall Street Journal reviewed this book, the Creative Destruction book, what was really interesting, they picked this as the call out for the article, which was kind of, I didn't think that was the most significant statement in the book, but that was kind of interesting they did that. Now, what was also interesting is that it's representative of where medicine's going, because now you have data for your sleep compared to 10,000 people of your age group, a peer group. Because as you likely know, as we get older, our sleep deteriorates. And so you want to have a group that you compare with. And just think if that's glucose, if that's blood pressure, or any metric that's relevant in medicine. So you can compare. And now what's really interesting is that this has become a big fad among athletes. And so knowing your ZQ score or your sleep, now there's triathletes that are using this. There's 3 NBA teams that are currently using Zeo every night to maximize their athletic performance. And so this is now a very safe way, as opposed to other historic ways that athletes were trying to improve their performance. Well, what's also interesting is now among pro athletes, there's a compilation of all the data for pro athletes. And this is a bar graph that summarizes it. The king of sleep among all the pro athletes is LeBron James, averaging 12 hours of sleep a night. And what's interesting is, no wonder they've never won the playoffs. And then the other interesting facet of this is that the person with the very least sleep is Tiger Woods. And I'm not going to comment further on that. Now, there are very kind of early stage devices now that you can get your blood pressure that are fun. It doesn't quite gamify things, but it does make it a lot more fun. So now my patients, instead of recommending the traditional blood pressure cuff called an Omron device that go to Costco, I now send them to iHealth or Withings to order it online. Again, $99. These things are fun because you press the button, gets the blood pressure, it charts it, sends it to your doctor or your Facebook friends or your Google Plus circles, whatever, and then you have it all stored. And the same thing for glucose. That's a good thing. That's not where we want it to be. We want it to be seamless, but that's at least a step in the right direction. Well, this is also the case for diabetes. For type 1, so-called insulin-dependent juvenile diabetes, we can measure glucose every 5 minutes, but currently there's a separate receiver. It's bulky. If you're a diabetic, you don't want to have this big device to be pulling out all the time, because then people say, "What's the matter with you?" You got to tell them, "I have diabetes. I'm looking at my glucose." But what I have is a prototype that I'm wearing this sensor just like pictured on this slide. And you can wear it on your abdomen or your arm, wherever. And I can just turn on my phone, and I can see, when I turn it on, 137, and I can just say my glucose at this very moment in time is 103. And that's good since we just ate lunch at your cafeteria with unlimited buffet. I'm glad it's not a lot higher than that. But what's also nice is I can just get the data for the trend. For, here's the 3-hour trend of glucose, 6 hours, 12 hours, 24, whatever I want. And I can send it, if I'm concerned, to whoever I want it to send it to. That's the beginning of an exciting time for example, lifestyle improvement. If you're looking at something, should you eat it or not, and you're looking at your phone, and it's going to tell you what your glucose is going to do when you eat this big cookie, well, you might not eat the cookie because you don't want to stress out your pancreas, particularly if you know that you're pre-diabetic or you're genomically vulnerable to get diabetes. Now, Ronnie mentioned this in the intro, is that this is a device that I can get, I got to pull up my iPhone, but this is a device where I can get a cardiogram right on the device. And so you see these two sensors on the back. You make a circuit with your heart like that. And so, just popping into the case, I can then just turn this thing on and get a cardiogram. Just got to put in password in the app, get that ready. And then I'll just show you that here's put my fingers on the back, and then we'll pop up my cardiogram. Now, this is a really cool device because you say, well, my gosh, why wasn't this invented, tens of years ago? And what's also pretty cool is that I have a credit card version where you can put it in your wallet or you can put it in your purse. It has the same two sensors. And then you can do the chest leads. I don't know if you ever had a cardiogram, but you can get the different leads like this. And that's what you heard about being on a plane. It actually happened where someone in the last row was having chest pain. They called for a doctor on the plane. There were 3 other doctors who were surgeons that don't really know how to evaluate chest pain. And I don't know if I'd know how to evaluate it fully unless I had a cardiogram. And this is, at 30,000 feet, you don't have a cardiogram to do. But now I had it, I could say this person was having a bona fide large heart attack, and that led to an emergency landing of the plane. And also, when we landed and the passenger was whisked off to get the heart attack artery opened up, then the pilots and the flight attendants all wanted to have their cardiogram done, which was really interesting. Okay, so those are just a couple of devices to show you, to give you a sense of how this field is moving fast. And they're actually getting old now. A lot of other devices I couldn't bring with me today give you a sense. This one is really interesting, the Halter Monitor. You probably don't know what that is, but this was invented in 1949 with a frozen design. And you have to wear all these wires to find out your heart rhythm over the course of 24 hours. You have to go in and get it connected, then you have to go to a clinic, then you have to go back and get it disconnected. You can't shower, you can't exercise. Now we have a Band-Aid, you send in the mail, you send it back. It's the Netflix model of heart rhythm monitoring. Okay, and it's great, but it's only happened in recent months that this was available. And then just to give you a little bit more sense about what you can monitor on a phone, that this is all the vital signs, not just blood pressure, but also your oxygen in your blood concentration, your blood pressure, heart rhythm, temperature, and this is an amazing ability to basically get all vital signs on your phone continuously. So your phone in the future will look like this. This is technically feasible today. And it will get your constant readout of all your vital signs, as if you were in an intensive care unit. Now, you may not want to look at that data or have that, but it certainly will be interesting to see how that plays out and how it can help prevent people from having to be in the hospital. In fact, I think there won't be hospitals in the future except for intensive care units. Why would there be a hospital when you can do all this stuff at a patient's home? And it's much less expensive, much more comfortable. So why eventually are we going to need hospitals except for very limited reasons? Now, just some other apps to mention that are useful. If you're, for someone who has a skin lesion that you're worried about, you don't have to go to a dermatologist anymore. You just get a picture done, text within minutes saying not to worry, or you should indeed get this looked into. And then this one is amazing. If you're an optometrist, you better watch out because now there's a $2 add-on to the phone that was invented at MIT that gets refraction of your eyes and then sends that data to get your glasses made for $2. Pretty remarkable. And then you can pass it around to all your friends and your social network. And it's not, of course, being used that much in the US, but it's sure getting legs around the world. And there's, just speaking of eyes, there's ways to monitor the pressure in the eye to prevent glaucoma. And this is available in Europe, constant monitoring going to your phone. And then there's these things like a wheezometer that analyzes your breathing to prevent an asthma attack. And then this morning, I encountered that there is another interesting facet to asthma. This was reported that there's this smart inhaler. Most people, when they use an inhaler, they use it wrong. And now there's a video game to make you use it right. And that's really part of this gamification of medical devices. It's all part of this new era of medicine. There's also the ability to digitize breath to say whether or not someone might have lung cancer at a pretty high specificity and accuracy. So your competitor, Apple, has certainly been seen, like Google, as a big innovator. And so, in fact, at the time of Steve Jobs' death, it was thought, well, maybe the logo should be changed. And of course, like you, this company has had a big worldwide impact. And I thought you particularly might enjoy this one if you haven't seen it. This is the cover of New Yorker, and then another accompanying cartoon. Well, in this biography, which I don't know if any of you have read here, some of you may have read, I think it's a very good book, but I'm particularly because it traces the digital revolution over the course of really 3 decades. It took a while for it to be where it is today, but it's now, of course, going in exponential fashion. And then what was striking to me is this quote, because it was occurring near the end of the book, and it said from Steve Jobs, I think the biggest innovations of the 21st century will be the intersection of biology and technology. That's where you sit today in a digital frontier, and this is the big uncharted opportunity. And I certainly couldn't agree more that this is the real story going forward. So now let me just touch on the one aspect that is really biology. We were talking about physiology, and let's get into a little bit of biology, and that is genome sequencing. Up until now, in the recent years, we've been relying on these next generation sequencers that cost $750,000, and then a whole lot more expense for the reagents that are proprietary to run the sequence. The 6 billion letters that comprise a human genome, and they have to be sequenced 40 times at least to be accurate. Well, in January, this device, the Ion Proton, was released, and it said it could sequence the human genome in 2 hours. Prior to this, and still today, it takes us about 10 days. Dropping down from 10 days to 2 hours, so that's pretty good. Well then, this device last month was released. This is a USB sized device. This is now to get a sequence of a human genome in 15 minutes for less than $1,000. In fact, it's quoted as $900. This has exceeded Moore's law at a level that is unprecedented in our history. And so what's exciting about this is how you can apply it. And you've been hearing about the human genome since 2000, if you've been at least looking into this impact on the future of our world. But this is a sequence you can get right to your laptop, and then you can take a boy like this, whose life was saved by sequencing, Nicholas Volker. At this point, he was nearly going to die. He'd had 100 operations. I don't know any human being that's had 100 operations, no less a 5-year-old. And he was very sick in the hospital, intensive care, in a hyperbaric chamber. His pediatrician said, let's sequence him and see what is potentially this disease we've never seen in a human being before. And that led to finding the mutation that was the root cause, and that led to successful treatment. And now Nicholas Volker is as healthy as could be, cured 6-year-old. And that's a great story because it tells you the power of sequencing. Telling you, digitizing a human being who's so sick that no one knows what it is, and being able to turn that around into having, hopefully, with this young boy, a normal life. There's a family from San Diego, the Beery family. And so these twins, Alexis and Noah, were very sick. They had a movement disorder. They couldn't really function. In fact, Alexis was in the emergency room. She couldn't even breathe many times. She had a respiratory arrest. And so they got sequenced, they determined the cause, they determined the right therapy, and now Noah is a soccer star and his sister is a track star, just by sequencing. This is a protocol that we have at Scripps called IDIOM. IDIOM stands for Idiopathic Diseases of Man. That's a terrible term, idiopathic. It's a fancy medical term for we don't know. Idiopathic. Why don't we just say we don't know? Anyway, this is a 15-year-old girl who's wheelchair bound, who's brilliant, who blogs and is cheerful, but she has an unknown condition, and we're sequencing her along with other individuals right now, trying to digitize their biology so we can get the root cause, and hopefully it'll prove to be actionable. So we want to get rid of this term idiopathic. It was a bad term anyway, but it's also one that we can get rid of because we can sequence people and understand what is really going on. Then there's, of course, the cancer war that was declared decades ago, but now it's the real deal. We can actually do something in cancer. So this is an example of a tumor called malignant melanoma, metastatic, skin cancer all over the body. And this is a PET scan that shows the extent of the burden of cancer. And then 2 weeks later, after an oral pill directed to the mutation that was causing this cancer, BRAF gene, which is present in about 2/3 of people with this type of cancer, there was no evidence of any cancer. And this occurs in 85% of people who have this type of mutation in this particular cancer. So it's a great step forward, and it shows you the power of knowing what is the root cause of a cancer and then having a therapy directed towards it. Here's another example of a different drug that just got approved, but this is another basal cell carcinoma or brain cancer, medulloblastoma, 2 weeks later, specific against this hedgehog gene pathway, and then you have no evidence of cancer in over 85% of people just approved. The problem we have in cancer today is to do this, we'd like to have the tissue to be able to sequence. And in fact, get a whole genome sequence. But today, the tumor specimen from a biopsy or surgery is deposited in formaldehyde, and it's ruined. So we'd like to get that on track to just be FF, which is flash frozen. So that needs some work, but this cancer improvement in getting people to get the right therapy is on the way. And then beyond the whole area of cancer, there's many conditions like cystic fibrosis. We've known the gene for many years, but finally have a breakthrough. This is a drug called Kalydeco, which is just approved. It's directed against a specific mutation that causes cystic fibrosis. It only is accounting for, let's say, 3 or 4% of cystic fibrosis, but it's very potent. It works exceptionally well. And then this young girl who couldn't breathe hardly at all, she now is, as you see, very mobile and living a normal life. And this drug, as I mentioned, not only did it just get approved, but it had a eureka effect in terms of normalizing things like the so-called sweat chloride, and beyond that, even more importantly, that you could see the impact, the breathing, the placebo sugar pill versus the drug. And here you see just the weight gain of kids, just dramatic eureka type effects, which is great to see in a small number of people. This is a pretty gory slide, but what is showing is a drug reaction that can be lethal. That reaction is called the Stevens-Johnson syndrome, and it can be particularly induced by a drug Tegretol, which is used commonly. But now we know the gene that predicts this, and we can prevent someone from dying or having to be so sick from this, because one genotype, one base analysis can solve that problem. And then just last week, I had a op-ed in the New York Times about statins. I don't know if you're familiar with statins. It's the most commonly used prescription drug. But unfortunately, it's overdosing the country, and the side effect of diabetes has been underplayed. And this graph just shows that 1 in 255 people, irrespective of any statin that's been looked at, get diabetes from these drugs. And then 91,000 patients in all these different trials. But particularly concerning are the potent statins, because these are the statins that have the particular liability. And these are like Crestor, Lipitor, high doses of simvastatin, and those are the ones to be on the lookout. But yet we don't know the genes, the variations in the genes that are accounting for this problem. Now, one other area just to touch on about digitizing people, and that's imaging. Now, the stethoscope was invented in 1816. This is that cartoon of René Laennec. And that stethoscope doesn't look like that anymore, thank goodness. It looks like this. But we don't need a stethoscope, for example, to listen to the heart because we have a portable, high-resolution ultrasound device that fits right in the pocket better than a stethoscope. And this device, in just a minute, you can capture exactly what the heart looks like. And this is an amazing tool because we can basically digitize the person's heart in a minute or two, and no longer are we listening to lub-dub, which isn't really that informative when you can see everything. And this is a normal heart, and here's an example of a very sick heart where you see much less ability of the heart muscle to contract. All the chambers of the heart are very dilated. There's a lot less blood flow moving. Just to give you a sense, these are images that are acquired in a minute, and they can be not just of the heart, the abdomen, they can be of the fetus or a pregnant woman, all sorts of things that we can do we couldn't do just a year or two ago. The thing that perhaps you might find the most interesting, perhaps scary, is the ability to read your mind. And the idea that we could see the movies in your brain. You say, well, that can't possibly be. And to talk about imaging, this is not just mind-goggling, this is mind-blowing. This is now the ability to construct brain activation maps from functional magnetic resonance imaging of the brain. And we can digitize brains, and best exemplified by this UC Berkeley study published last fall, where they took people, young people like you, put them in a magnetic resonance imaging, showed them a YouTube video, and then they, without any knowledge of the video, they tried to construct what the individual was seeing in their brain. And this is what it looked like. You say, oh, well, that doesn't really look like Steve Martin, or it doesn't look like that. Well, you know what? That's pretty good, not knowing anything about the video. And this is, vintage 2011. What's that going to look like in 2013 or 2015? And they just recently published the same sort of thing with auditory signals. They can reconstruct the music or whatever the sound was through the same type of technique. So I just want to, last couple of minutes, put this together. This is the crack to try to get in your mind. This is why people die. They have a crack in their artery, whether it's a crack in the artery of their heart or to their brain that causes a stroke. And the crack is something we haven't been able to diagnose. This has been elusive. We haven't been able to digitize the people who are going to have a crack. Tim Russert was in the NBC studio, and he collapsed and a massive heart attack. But 3 weeks before that, he'd had a normal treadmill test. Common scenario. Now, why could that happen, and why is it so common? Because we do these treadmill tests all the time, but they only tell us if there's a tight narrowing that's blocking the blood supply. Most cracks occur where there isn't a tight narrowing, and we haven't had any way to diagnose that. Well, now we have done a study where in the San Diego area, we've had all the heart attack people, we got blood samples in the early minutes to find these cells that were sloughing off from their artery. We found them, identified them, sequenced them, and have all kinds of genomics that we've done, and we've shown that that is a unique signature that we can detect. And in fact, we're publishing on that in just a couple of weeks in a leading journal. So this is important because then you can combine this and develop with an embedded sensor. We have all these embedded sensors in our car. Well, I think our bodies are a little more important than our car. And you probably take all that stuff for granted because you've never been sick. But those of us who've been sick would like to have an embedded sensor to prevent significant illness. And this is a chip that was just published on at Stanford, not far away, of course, a microchip that can be put in the blood to detect whatever you want. We have also been working on a nano chip the size of a grain of sand, just like this. You take the grain of sand nanosensor, you put it in the blood, like in the wrist, and then you have this molecular signature of a heart attack, and guess what you have? You have the new app for heart attack, or alternatively, an app for detecting the first cancer cell in the blood, since most cancers have a vascular supply. And of course, for diabetes, it takes 5 years to become diabetic, that is immune-mediated diabetes. You could detect during that 5-year stretch to prevent diabetes or prevent things like a transplant rejection. So here's the cell phone becoming center stage for the future of health because of this embedded sensor capability. So the last thing I just want to mention is about consumers needing to drive this. And that's actually why I put this book together, because this is a real opportunity which will be left in a stasis mode unless we get moving. And to me, it's just remarkable. This is in January in the Wall Street Journal, and it was a survey reported of about physicians using email. Email's been around a long time, even before Google. And I've been using email with patients since 93, 94. I don't know what, This is amazing to me that 62% of physicians refuse to use email with their patients today. It's 2012. This is an amazing article from JAMA, the leading journal in medicine. It said, should patients have access to their laboratory tests? Well, sorry to say, it's their laboratory test. How can they ask this question? How about this one? This is, should patients have access to their office notes of the doctor? How could you ask that question? Just because it might say in the note that the patient had something about SOB and it means shortness of breath, eventually the person should figure that out, of course, or maybe need a little bit of guidance. There's this fellow who is in the Bay Area, Hugo Campos, who has a defibrillator, and he just wants to get his data of his heart rhythm from the company, and they won't let him have it. And he's on a tear appropriately that he should get his data. And then the worst of all is the American Medical Association. They are lobbying the government to prevent people from getting their DNA data. They only want doctors to be the ones to privy to that data, to mediate giving that to patients, which of course, that's I think, in violating the rights of the individual. So that's led to the emergence of citizen scientists. And that's, I think, a great thing. And this just came out, I just saw this this morning. This is a group at McGill in Canada, and they have gamified the use of sequencing. It's very difficult to align sequences, and they made it into a game, a video game, and they found that people with no scientific background could actually figure out how to align sequences and make it into a fun puzzle. And that's amazing, just to me, that you could take these sequences and make it into a game to assemble genomes, and that kind of gives you a sense of where the world could go. So I leave you with this last thought, which is that it's your charts, office notes, your laboratory tests, your scan results, your biosensor data, your DNA, your tissue, your social network. That's the way medicine should be. And since all this data is going to be now going into high gear, your ability to access it, this is the time for the individual to rise. And that's what's going to be necessary to really execute the future of medicine. So the whole thing, putting it together, we have this old Voltaire medicine today. And we can change that by bringing together the new tools that I've reviewed in digital medicine with the digital infrastructure. And that could lead to superconvergence, the biggest in our history. And then, of course, to this new participatory, precise medicine of the future. So I hope I can leave you with this concept. That was the whole goal, is that the future is indeed bright. And thanks a lot for your attention.
So what should ordinary people, like non-medical people, do? Is it now up to us to somehow figure out that we need to not sign the consent form before having our brain surgery until they change it to say we will not put your tumor in formaldehyde?
Yeah, I think that, well, if you today demand to your doctor that I want some of my specimen or my mother's specimen to be put in the freezer, they have to do that. So, but only if you know about it. So that's really part of the problem. Is it isn't even on the consent form. It's just a matter of knowledge, and that is what we have a big problem, is people just not aware of the opportunities that exist today.
Are there any sensors to do with things coming into the body or what you're coming in contact with? So I could think something that monitored air quality, that monitored what was in the food you ate, that monitored what chemicals you came in contact with your skin. And that way you could see correlations between what people came in contact with and the actual symptoms they had or diseases they had.
Yes, great point. So for asthma, the sensor of the future that some people are working on is one that will pick up air quality as well as these other things, so that you would be able to prevent an asthma attack, which of course can be lethal, particularly in children. So that's one example. But you're absolutely right, because what we take in our food stuff affects our microbiome. And so, for example, over lunch we were talking about, is it all about a story of calories in and calories out? Absolutely not, because there's a microbiome. You know, we have this, you know, millions of different bacterial flora organisms in our gut, which are changed by our diet, and also by taking antibiotics, for example.
Yeah.
And that has interaction of, in some people, pushing them towards obesity, or changing their metabolism, or making them at risk for diabetes or other immune diseases. So you're absolutely right. We need to get that data. It's not just what you excrete or what makes you tick. It's also your exposome, your environment. And that includes food, you know, the air, and your water, all those sorts of things. So it's a great point.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
In the early 2000s, I asked a family friend who's also a doctor about the fad that came out at that time about doing whole body MRI scans. And he basically said, don't do it. He's like, the problem is you'll find all sorts of things that are wrong with you that probably would do more harm than good to treat. And I think we see the same thing with like mammography, that the recent debate that's been going on about that. So I guess this isn't really a good argument for not collecting the data, but it is, I think, a need for how do you analyze it? Or do you have any insights into where the thresholds are for when you actually should take action?
Right, so you're bringing up some central concepts here. The ability to engender the incidental ohm, you know, where you basically back into findings just because you shouldn't have done the test in the first place. That's one thing. So more judicious use of the right test for the right person. You know, a lot of people just sign up for this total body CAT scan and they're just asking for trouble. And like you also brought up with mammography, there's a much higher rate of false biopsies, positive biopsies, and getting women and their families, you know, horrified than there is of preventing cancer. So the odds of getting a true abnormal biopsy is much lower than getting a false positive. So we need much more precise tools. Who should get the studies or procedures and how to interpret them. And you know, part of it is this whole Bayesian thing that the test or procedure is only good if it's being done on the right person. Hopefully in the future we're going to pick the right people and not have all these incidental findings which wind up causing all kinds of trouble.
So do you think, though, that it is a matter of not having precise enough tools, or could it be that even if you have all of the information, you still are in a situation where you're not sure whether it's a problem or not?
Well, that's a great point. I think a lot of it is the imprecision of the people having things done that just doesn't have any, it's just this mass medicine problem that we have today. But there still is an issue. So for example, when you have a whole genome sequence, you're doing it for, let's say we're trying to unravel that 15-year-old girl's story and we find these other things in there that we didn't anticipate. What do you do with that? So whenever you have a lot of data, the chance of you coming into things in an unintended way is going to be there. So this is an issue that has to be grappled with. You're bringing up a very important concern. Yeah. Anne?
Well, on that note, thanks so much for coming. You
Sure.
left us with a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot.